The alien princess's vow. Princess Zaraketh of the Vorthak Empire stood on the crystalline balcony of her palace, her 4 arms crossed defiantly as she gazed out at the sprawling capital city below. Her scaled skin shimmered with an angry purple hue, a clear sign of her emotional state to anyone familiar with Vorthak biology. The twin suns cast long shadows across the metropolis, but Zaraketh's mind was focused on the heated argument she'd just had with her father, Emperor Thexmor. "I will never marry a human," she had declared, her voice echoing through the throne room. "Those barbaric creatures are beneath our notice, let alone worthy of union with Vorthak royalty." The Emperor had remained calm, his own scales maintaining their usual regal gold coloration. "Daughter, this alliance is necessary for the stability of our sector. The Human Federation controls 17 star systems, and their military prowess cannot be ignored." "Military prowess?" Zaraketh had scoffed. "Father, they're barely past their Stone Age. They only achieved faster-than-light travel 300 cycles ago. Our civilization was building stellar monuments when their ancestors were still discovering fire." Now alone on her balcony, Zaraketh's anger had not diminished. The very idea of being paired with one of those crude, 2-armed mammals made her stomach churn. She had studied human biology in her xenological courses. Their primitive single-heart circulatory system, their inability to regenerate lost limbs, their ridiculously short lifespans. How could her father expect her to spend even a portion of her 800-year lifespan bound to such an inferior being? A soft chime from her personal communicator interrupted her brooding. "Princess, the human delegation has arrived," announced Veltar, her personal aide. "Your father requests your presence in the formal reception hall." Zaraketh's scales darkened further. "Tell him I'm indisposed." "I'm afraid he anticipated that response, Your Highness. He says that if you don't appear within 10 minutes, he'll have the royal guard escort you." Sighing heavily through her dual respiratory slits, Zaraketh straightened her ceremonial robes. If she had to endure this farce, she would at least maintain her dignity. She made her way through the palace corridors, her hooved feet clicking against the polished stone floors. Servants and courtiers bowed as she passed, but she barely acknowledged them, her mind racing with ways to sabotage this ridiculous marriage proposal. The reception hall was a magnificent display of Vorthak architecture, with soaring arches that seemed to defy gravity and walls embedded with precious stones from across their empire. As Zaraketh entered, she saw her father standing at the head of the hall alongside several high-ranking officials. Opposite them stood the human delegation. Zaraketh had expected to see the typical human diplomatic party, elderly males in dark clothing, probably smelling of the strange stimulants their species was fond of consuming. Instead, she found herself looking at a diverse group of beings that challenged many of her preconceptions. The leader of the delegation was a human female with short silver hair and piercing blue eyes. Her posture radiated confidence and intelligence, and when she spoke, her voice carried an authority that commanded attention. "Your Imperial Majesty, I am Admiral Sarah Chen of the Human Federation. We are honored by your invitation to discuss this proposed alliance." Standing slightly behind Admiral Chen was the human male who was presumably intended to be Zaraketh's betrothed. Her first glimpse of him sent an unexpected shiver through her scales. He was tall for a human, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold depths she hadn't expected. Unlike the crude barbarian she had imagined, he carried himself with a quiet dignity that reminded her of the elite warriors of her own people. "Princess Zaraketh," Emperor Thexmor's voice cut through her observations. "May I present Captain Marcus Reed of the Human Federation Navy?" The human, Marcus, stepped forward and executed what she grudgingly had to admit was a perfect Vorthak formal bow. His pronunciation of her name was flawless, each syllable given the proper tonal emphasis that even some of her own courtiers struggled with. "Your Highness," Marcus said, his voice calm and respectful, "I am honored to meet you. I understand this situation is as unexpected for you as it is for me." Zaraketh felt a moment of surprise. She had expected arrogance, perhaps some crude attempt at charm. Instead, she detected genuine understanding in his tone. She inclined her head slightly, the minimum acknowledgement required by protocol. "Captain Reed," she replied, keeping her voice cool and formal. The formal presentations continued. But Zaraketh found her attention repeatedly drawn to the human captain. He didn't fidget like she expected humans to do, nor did he seem overwhelmed by the grandeur of the palace. Instead, he listened attentively to each speaker, occasionally asking thoughtful questions about Vorthak culture and customs. When the formal reception concluded, traditional protocol demanded that she offer the guests a tour of the palace grounds. It was another duty she had hoped to avoid, but her father's stern look made it clear that her participation was not optional. As they walked through the royal gardens, Admiral Chen and Emperor Thexmor engaged in deep discussions about trade agreements and military cooperation, leaving Zaraketh to escort Captain Reed through the more scenic areas of the grounds. "Your palace is remarkable," Marcus commented as they passed a fountain sculpted from a single massive crystal. "The integration of natural geological formations with constructed elements shows incredible artistic vision." Zaraketh glanced at him sharply. She had expected typical human responses, crude exclamations about size or wealth. Instead, he had identified one of the key philosophical principles underlying Vorthak architecture. "You know something of our architectural traditions?" she asked, unable to keep the curiosity from her voice. "I studied xeno-architecture at the Federation Academy," Marcus replied. "Vorthak crystalline construction techniques are considered among the most sophisticated in the galaxy. The way your architects work with existing planetary formations rather than simply imposing artificial structures shows a level of environmental harmony that my people are still learning to achieve." Despite herself, Zaraketh felt a small spark of interest. Most species focus on the durability and defensive capabilities of our construction. Few appreciate the philosophical elements. "Durability without beauty is mere survival," Marcus said quietly. "Beauty without durability is vanity. Your people seem to understand that true greatness requires both." They continued through the gardens in contemplative silence. Zaraketh found herself stealing glances at her companion, trying to reconcile his thoughtful observations with her preconceptions about human intelligence. When they reached the memorial grove, where crystalline trees honored fallen Vorthak heroes, Marcus stopped before the central monument. "May I ask about this memorial?" he inquired respectfully. Zaraketh hesitated. The memorial grove was sacred to her people, and she had never discussed its significance with an outsider. But something in Marcus's tone suggested genuine reverence rather than casual curiosity. "These trees represent warriors who gave their lives protecting our people," she explained. "Each crystal formation contains mineral samples from their homeworlds, so they remain connected to the planets they died defending." Marcus stood quietly for a long moment, then bowed his head briefly. "We have similar memorials in human space. The form is different, but the purpose is the same, ensuring that sacrifice is never forgotten." "Humans honor their war dead?" Zaraketh asked, surprised. "Of course. Don't all civilized species?" The simple question struck her unexpectedly. In her xenological studies, she had learned that humans engaged in frequent conflicts, but she had assumed this indicated a lack of honor and civilization. The idea that they also revered sacrifice and heroism complicated her understanding. As they made their way back toward the palace, Marcus asked, "Princess, Would it be appropriate for me to ask what concerns you most about this proposed alliance? The directness of the question caught her off guard. Diplomatic conversations were usually layered with subtlety and implication. But there was no deception in his tone, only genuine interest in her perspective. "You want honesty?" she replied, her scales shifting toward a more neutral color. "Always. I believe humans are primitive barbarians who have stumbled into advanced technology they don't understand, creating military might without wisdom. I think this alliance is my father's attempt to contain a dangerous species by binding them with marriage obligations they're too undeveloped to break." She expected anger or offense. Instead, Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "That's a reasonable assessment based on available evidence," he said. "Humans did achieve spaceflight very recently by galactic standards, and our history is full of conflicts and mistakes. We've made terrible errors that cost millions of lives." His calm acceptance of her criticism was so unexpected that Zaraketh found herself at a loss for words. "But," Marcus continued, "rapid technological development doesn't necessarily indicate primitive thinking. Sometimes it means a species is adaptable enough to learn from others and wise enough to recognize their own limitations." "And you believe humans possess this wisdom?" "Some do. Others don't. Like any species, we're individuals with varying capabilities and moral development. The key is ensuring that our leaders and representatives are chosen from among those who do possess wisdom and honor." They had reached the palace entrance, where Admiral Chen and Emperor Thexmore were concluding their discussions. As the human delegation prepared to depart, Marcus turned to Zaraketh. "Your Highness, I want you to know that I understand your objections to this arrangement. If we proceed, it should be because we choose to, not because duty compels us. Would you be willing to meet again tomorrow? Not as potential betrothed, but simply as two individuals trying to understand each other's peoples?" The request was so unexpected that Zaraketh found herself agreeing before she fully considered the implications. As she watched the human delegation depart, she realized that Captain Marcus Reed had accomplished something she would have considered impossible just hours earlier. He had made her curious about humanity. That evening, as Zaraketh prepared for sleep, she found her mind returning repeatedly to their conversation. The human's responses had challenged several of her fundamental assumptions about his species. His knowledge of Vorthak culture, his respectful behavior in their sacred spaces, and his willingness to acknowledge human failings while explaining their potential strengths painted a more complex picture than she had expected. She activated her personal research terminal and began reviewing the files on Captain Marcus Reed. His service record was impressive: multiple decorations for bravery, commendations for innovative tactical thinking, and notably, several citations for protecting civilian populations during conflicts. Most surprisingly, he had spent 2 years studying comparative xenology and interspecies relations at the Federation's most prestigious academic institution. The next morning, Zaraketh met Marcus in the palace's scholarly wing, home to one of the galaxy's most extensive xenological libraries. She had chosen the location deliberately, wanting to test whether his intellectual interests were genuine or merely diplomatic pretense. "I thought you might appreciate seeing our historical archives," she explained as they walked through corridors lined with crystal data storage units. "This is incredible," Marcus replied, his eyes widening as he took in the scope of the collection. "Some of these records must date back thousands of years." "Nearly 15,000, Zaraketh confirmed. "We've maintained detailed records of our interactions with over 300 species." "Including humans?" "The first entries about your species date back 50 years, when our deep space scouts encountered your generation ships." Marcus paused at a viewing station displaying early observations of human colony ships. "What did your people think of us then?" Zaraketh activated the display, showing detailed scientific observations alongside cultural assessments. The reports noted human determination and adaptability, but questioned whether you possessed the emotional maturity necessary for successful interspecies relations. And now, the question remains open. They spent the morning exploring the archives, with Zaraketh sharing Vorthak historical perspectives while Marcus offered insights into human development and philosophy. She found herself impressed by his ability to see patterns and connections that many of her own scholars missed. "Your people's approach to conflict resolution is fascinating," Marcus observed as they reviewed diplomatic records. "The Vorthak seem to prefer long-term stability over short-term advantage." "Stability allows growth," Zaraketh replied. "Chaos only breeds more chaos." "Humans are learning that lesson. We've had to, given the consequences of our earlier mistakes." As the day progressed, Zaraketh realized that her perception of Marcus was undergoing a fundamental shift. The barbarian she had expected to meet was nowhere to be found. Instead, she was discovering an intelligent, thoughtful individual whose perspectives often complemented her own in unexpected ways. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the palace security chief. "Princess, we're receiving distress signals from the Kepler mining colony. They're under attack by Ravager pirates." Zaraketh's scales immediately shifted to deep red, the Vorthak color of alarm. The Kepler colony was home to over 50,000 civilians, and Ravager pirates were notorious for their brutality. "How long until our fleet can reach them?" she demanded. 6 hours minimum, Your Highness. By then—" The implication hung heavy in the air. Ravager attacks were swift and merciless. 6 hours would be far too long. "What about human ships?" Marcus asked quietly. "Human ships?" The security chief looked confused. "Admiral Chen's task force is still in this system. We have 3 cruisers and a dreadnought. We could reach the colony in 90 minutes. Zaraketh stared at him. "You would risk human lives to protect Vorthak civilians?" "Of course. That's what allies do." The simplicity of his response struck her like a physical blow. Without hesitation, without calculating advantage or demanding concessions, he was offering to place human vessels and crews in danger to protect her people. "I need to speak with my father immediately," she said, already moving toward the communication center. The next few hours were a blur of rapid decisions and desperate coordination. Emperor Thexmore authorized joint military action, and Admiral Chen's task force moved to intercept the Ravager fleet. Zaraketh insisted on observing the battle from the palace command center, despite protocol that normally would have required her to retreat to secure bunkers. The tactical displays showed the human ships moving with precision and purpose toward the embattled colony. When they engaged the Ravager fleet, Zaraketh watched in amazement as human tactics proved both innovative and effective. Rather than the crude frontal assault she had expected, the human commanders used coordinated strikes and superior maneuverability to systematically dismantle the pirate formation. "Remarkable," breathed General Korthvex, the Vorthak military commander observing alongside her. "Their ships are smaller and less heavily armored than ours, but they're using them like surgical instruments rather than blunt weapons." The battle concluded in less than 20 minutes, with the Ravager fleet either destroyed or fled. More importantly, the colony's civilian population had been saved with minimal casualties. As reports came in confirming the successful rescue, Zaraketh found herself looking at Marcus with entirely new eyes. The human who had seemed like a diplomatic inconvenience just 2 days earlier had proven himself capable of immediate, selfless action to protect strangers. "Your people fought bravely today," she said quietly. "Your people were worth fighting for," Marcus replied. In that moment, Zaraketh realized that everything she thought she knew about humans, and about Marcus Reed in particular, had been fundamentally wrong. The barbarians she had dismissed were capable of nobility, sacrifice, and wisdom that rivaled her own people's greatest virtues. For the first time since the marriage proposal had been announced, Princess Zaraketh of the Vorthak Empire found herself wondering if perhaps, just perhaps, she might have been too hasty in her judgment of humanity. As she watched Marcus coordinating relief efforts for the colony survivors, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered a possibility she would have considered absurd just days earlier. Maybe, under the right circumstances, she could imagine herself married to this human after all. The transformation. 3 weeks after the Kepler colony rescue, Princess Zaraketh found herself in an unprecedented situation. She was actually looking forward to her daily meetings with Captain Marcus Reed. What had begun as diplomatic obligation had evolved into genuine intellectual exchange, and she was beginning to understand why the Human Federation had chosen him as their representative. The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace training grounds as Zaraketh made her way to meet Marcus for their scheduled cultural exchange session. Today's topic was military philosophy and tactics, a subject that had taken on new relevance after witnessing human combat effectiveness firsthand. She found Marcus in the warrior's courtyard, examining a display of traditional Vorthak weapons with the same careful attention he applied to everything else. His ability to focus completely on whatever task was before him was one of the qualities she had come to respect about him. "These blade configurations are fascinating," Marcus said without looking up. "The molecular alignment suggests they're designed for precision rather than brute force." "Vorthak warriors believe that elegance in combat reflects elegance of mind," Zaraketh replied, approaching the display. "Our martial traditions emphasize the connection between physical skill and mental discipline. Similar to some human martial arts, though our weapons technology took a different evolutionary path." Marcus lifted one of the ceremonial blades, testing its balance with movements that suggested genuine training rather than casual interest. "May I ask who taught you to fight?" "Master Velcanis, the same instructor who trained my father and grandfather before him. He's over 400 years old and still considers me barely adequate as a student." Zaraketh's scales shifted to a warm amber color, indicating fond remembrance. "He would probably say that discussing technique is worthless without demonstration." Marcus set down the blade carefully. "Would it be appropriate for me to request a training session?" "I'd be honored to learn from a master of your martial traditions." The request surprised her. Few diplomats showed interest in physically demanding cultural activities, preferring the safety of theoretical discussions. "Master Velcanis doesn't typically train non-Vorthak students, but given your help at Kepler, I think he might make an exception." An hour later, they stood in the central training arena while Master Velcanis evaluated Marcus with the penetrating gaze of someone who had spent centuries assessing warriors. The elderly Vorthak's scales bore the ritual scarification that marked him as a weapons master, and his forearms moved with fluid precision despite his advanced age. "So," Velcanis said, his voice carrying the authority of absolute expertise, "the human wishes to learn our ways. Tell me, Captain Reed, what do you hope to gain from this training?" "Understanding," Marcus replied simply. "Your people have developed combat techniques over thousands of years. Even if I can't master them in a few sessions, I can learn the principles behind them." Velcanis circled Marcus slowly, examining his stance and movement. "Humans have only 2 arms. This limits your options significantly." "True, but it also forces us to be more efficient with the tools we have." "Demonstrate." Marcus moved into a ready position that Zaraketh recognized as distinctly human in origin, balanced but compact, emphasizing mobility over the reach advantages that Vorthak fighters typically exploited. When Velcanis attacked with a traditional 4-armed sequence, Marcus responded with movements that were economical and precise. The sparring session that followed was unlike anything Zaraketh had ever witnessed. Velkanis was clearly holding back considerably, but even so, Marcus held his own better than many young Vorthak warriors she had seen train. More importantly, he adapted quickly to his opponent's four-armed style, finding ways to use his lower center of gravity and different limb proportions to his advantage. "Interesting," Velkanis said when they paused for rest. "Your reflexes are adequate, but more importantly, you think while fighting. Many warriors rely on instinct alone, but you calculate and adapt. In human military training, we learn that every opponent has advantages and disadvantages. The key is understanding both and adjusting your strategy accordingly. A sound philosophy. Princess, your human shows promise. With proper instruction, he might achieve competence in our basic forms." Coming from Master Velkanis, this was equivalent to enthusiastic praise. Zaraketh found herself feeling unexpectedly proud of Marcus's performance. Over the following days, the training sessions became a regular part of their routine. Zaraketh often joined them, and she began to see Marcus in a completely new light. His dedication to learning Vorthak techniques was genuine and comprehensive. He studied the philosophical foundations as intensively as the physical movements. "Your combat philosophy emphasizes harmony between mind and body," Marcus observed one evening as they reviewed the day's training. "But there's something deeper there, isn't there? A connection to your broader cultural values?" Zaraketh paused in her review of combat forms. Few outsiders ever grasped the deeper significance of Vorthak martial arts. The warrior's path is considered a reflection of the citizen's duty. We believe that those who defend society must embody society's highest ideals. So your warriors are expected to be philosophers as well as fighters? The greatest warriors have always been scholars, artists, and leaders. Physical prowess without wisdom is mere brutality. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Humans have a saying, "The warrior and the scholar are one person." But we don't always live up to that ideal. Do any of us? Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent summons from Emperor Thexmore. The imperial court was in session, dealing with what appeared to be a significant crisis. As they made their way to the throne room, Zaraketh's personal aide provided a rapid briefing. "The hegemony has issued an ultimatum," Veltar explained quietly. "They're demanding that we cease all negotiations with the Human Federation and submit to their protection protocols. They claim that humans represent a destabilizing influence in this sector." Zaraketh's scales flushed angry red. The hegemony was a collection of older civilizations that considered themselves the galaxy's natural leaders. They had long resented the Vorthak Empire's independence and had been looking for an excuse to impose their will. In the throne room, the atmosphere was tense. Emperor Thexmore sat on the crystal throne while his advisors debated response options. The hegemony's representative, Ambassador Kethvar of the Centauran Collective, stood before the assembled court with typical hegemony arrogance. "Emperor Thexmore," Kethvar was saying, "surely you understand the danger of associating with these human newcomers. Their aggressive expansion and primitive worldview threaten the stability that the hegemony has maintained for millennia. The Human Federation has honored every agreement they've made with us," the Emperor replied calmly. "I see no evidence of the aggression you claim. Their rescue of your mining colony was clearly a demonstration of military capability designed to intimidate," Kethvar countered. "Such shows of force indicate an inherently warlike nature." Marcus stepped forward, his movement catching everyone's attention. "Ambassador Kethvar, may I address the court?" The Centauran's multifaceted eyes fixed on him with obvious disdain. "The accused rarely provides useful testimony." "I'm not here as the accused," Marcus replied calmly. "I'm here as someone who was actually present during the Kepler incident." Emperor Thexmore gestured for him to continue. "The court recognizes Captain Reed. The Human Federation responded to a distress call from civilians under attack by pirates. Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. We did so because Admiral Chen and I believed it was the right thing to do, not as a demonstration of power. If Ambassador Kethvar considers the protection of innocent life to be evidence of aggressive intent, I wonder what that says about hegemony values. Kethvar's skin color shifted through several emotional ranges. You dare question hegemony policies? I question any policy that sees the rescue of civilians as threatening. The exchange that followed revealed the fundamental difference between human and hegemony approaches to interstellar relations. The hegemony represented ancient, established powers that preferred stability above all else. Humans represented change and unpredictability, qualities that threatened the carefully maintained balance the hegemony had spent centuries creating. As the debate continued, Zaraketh watched Marcus defend not just human actions, but human principles. His arguments were logical and passionate, without being emotional. More importantly, he showed a deep understanding of galactic politics that challenged the hegemony's characterization of humans as naive newcomers. The hegemony's ultimatum forces a choice, Marcus said finally. Princess Zaraketh and I can abandon our plans for alliance, preserving the status quo that the hegemony prefers. Or we can proceed, demonstrating that independent species can make their own decisions about their futures. You would risk war for a marriage? Kethvar demanded. I would risk war for the principle that free peoples should determine their own destinies, Marcus replied. The chamber fell silent. Even Emperor Thexmore seemed surprised by the directness of Marcus's statement. But Zaraketh felt a surge of emotion she hadn't expected. This human was willing to face the galaxy's most powerful alliance rather than abandon the idea of unity between their peoples. This court will recess to consider the hegemony ultimatum, Emperor Thexmore announced. Ambassador Kethvar, you will have our answer within 48 hours. As the court dispersed, Zaraketh found herself walking alongside Marcus toward the palace gardens. Neither spoke until they reached the secluded area where they had first discussed architecture and philosophy. You realize what you just did? She asked quietly. I told the truth. You challenged the most powerful political alliance in the galaxy. Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her. Zaraketh, I need you to understand something. This proposed marriage started as a political arrangement, but it's become something more for me. I've come to respect your people, your culture, and... He paused, choosing his words carefully. You personally. I won't pretend that political convenience is my only motivation anymore. The honesty in his voice struck her like a physical blow. She had been so focused on her own changing feelings that she hadn't fully considered the possibility that his might be evolving as well. What are you saying? She asked, though part of her already knew. I'm saying that if we go forward with this alliance, it won't be just because our governments want it. It will be because I want to spend my life learning about your culture, supporting your people and... He hesitated again. Earning your respect and affection. Zaraketh stared at him, her scales shifting through colors that reflected the turmoil of her emotions. Everything she thought she knew about this situation had changed. The political marriage she had been dreading was transforming into something that might actually bring her happiness. Marcus, she said slowly, 3 weeks ago, I would have said that was impossible. And now? Now I think I'm beginning to understand why my father believed this alliance could work. That evening, Zaraketh found herself in an unprecedented situation. She was falling in love with the human she had sworn never to marry. The realization was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. But as she prepared for sleep, her mind kept returning to the hegemony ultimatum. Tomorrow, her father would have to choose between the security of ancient alliances and the promise of something new and untested. The decision would determine not just the fate of the marriage proposal, but the future relationship between humans and Vorthax. She had spent weeks learning about human courage and honor. Now it was time to discover whether she possessed enough of those qualities to stand beside Marcus when he faced whatever consequences his defiance of the hegemony might bring. The next morning brought news that would test everything she thought she had learned about herself and about the human who was changing her entire understanding of what was possible. Everything changes. Princess Zaraketh woke to the sound of emergency alerts echoing through the palace corridors. The harsh, rhythmic tones indicated an immediate threat to the Empire, and she was on her feet and moving before her mind fully processed what was happening. Her scales had already shifted to combat red, an involuntary response to danger that had been bred into her people over millennia. "Princess!" Veltar burst into her chambers, his usual composed demeanor replaced by obvious panic. "The hegemony fleet has entered our space. 12 dreadnoughts and support vessels. They're demanding immediate surrender and the expulsion of all human forces." Zaraketh's mind raced as she processed the implications. The hegemony hadn't simply rejected their right to form an alliance with humanity. They had decided to enforce their will through military action. "Where is Captain Reed?" "He's in the war room with your father and Admiral Chen. The human task force is moving to defensive positions around the planet." As Zaraketh rushed through the palace toward the command center, she couldn't help but think about the irony of the situation. Just yesterday, she had been contemplating the possibility of a future with Marcus Reed. Now they might all be dead before the day was over. The war room was a chaos of activity when she arrived. Tactical displays showed the disposition of forces throughout the system, and the numbers were sobering. The hegemony fleet outnumbered the combined human Vorthak forces by nearly 3-1, and their technological advantages were significant. Emperor Thexmore stood at the center of the room, his scales showing the deep gold of determined leadership. Around him, military advisors from both species worked to coordinate their defense plans. Marcus and Admiral Chen were huddled over a tactical display with General Korthvex, apparently discussing something of critical importance. "Daughter!" The Emperor acknowledged her arrival without taking his eyes off the main strategic display. "The situation is grave. The hegemony commander has given us 6 hours to surrender unconditionally and turn over all human personnel for processing." "Processing?" Zaraketh's scales darkened further. "A euphemism," Admiral Chen said grimly from across the room. "In hegemony territory, species that resist their authority tend to disappear into detention facilities. Their definition of processing usually involves memory modification and permanent exile to labor worlds." The casual mention of such brutal punishment sent a chill through Zaraketh. She had known that the hegemony could be ruthless, but she hadn't fully grasped the extent of their willingness to destroy anyone who challenged their authority. "What are our options?" she asked. "Surrender and watch our human allies suffer for the crime of helping us," General Korthvex said bitterly, "or fight and likely lose everything." "There might be a third option," Marcus said quietly, finally looking up from his tactical analysis. "But it's extremely dangerous, and it would require perfect coordination between our forces." "Explain," Emperor Thexmore commanded. Marcus activated a 3-dimensional tactical display showing the enemy fleet disposition. "The hegemony forces are arranged in a traditional siege formation. Overwhelming firepower concentrated to prevent any possibility of escape. But they're also overconfident. They've positioned their command ships in the center of their formation, protected by layers of smaller vessels." "Standard hegemony doctrine," General Korthvex agreed. "What's your point?" "The weakness in this formation is that it's designed to contain rather than maneuver. If we could penetrate their perimeter and threaten their command vessels directly, we might be able to force them to withdraw rather than risk a mutually destructive engagement." Admiral Chen frowned at the display. "The firepower differential is too great. We'd never break through their perimeter with a conventional assault. Not with a conventional assault, Marcus agreed. But the Vorthak fleet has something the hegemony doesn't expect. Stealth capabilities. All eyes turned to him. Vorthak stealth technology was one of their most closely guarded military secrets, unknown to most of the galaxy's other powers. You know about our stealth systems? General Korthvex asked suspiciously. I've observed their effects, though not their mechanisms, Marcus replied carefully. During our training sessions, I've seen Vorthak ships appear and disappear from sensor coverage in ways that suggest advanced cloaking technology. Emperor Thexmore exchanged glances with his military commander. The existence of Vorthak stealth technology was classified at the highest levels. The fact that Marcus had deduced it from casual observation said something significant about his analytical abilities. Even if we could get past their perimeter, General Korthvex said slowly, we lack the firepower to threaten their capital ships. We don't need to destroy them, Marcus replied. We just need to create enough uncertainty to make them reconsider the cost of their aggression. You're talking about a bluff, Admiral Chen said. I'm talking about changing the terms of engagement. Right now, the hegemony sees this as a low-risk police action against inferior opponents. We need to make them understand that attacking us will be costly, regardless of the outcome. Zaraketh studied the tactical display, her mind working through the implications of Marcus's proposal. It was audacious to the point of insanity, but it might be their only chance of avoiding either surrender or total destruction. What exactly are you proposing? She asked. Marcus manipulated the display to show movement patterns for both fleets. The human ships serve as a distraction, engaging their perimeter forces and drawing their attention. Meanwhile, the Vorthak stealth vessels penetrate the formation and threaten their command ships. We don't need to win the battle. We just need to demonstrate that victory would cost them more than they're willing to pay. The risks are enormous, General Korthvex pointed out. If the stealth penetration fails, our ships would be trapped deep in enemy formation with no support. If we do nothing, we're dead anyway, Admiral Chen replied bluntly. At least this plan gives us a chance. Emperor Thexmore was quiet for a long moment, weighing the options. Finally, he looked directly at Marcus. Captain Reed, you're asking my people to risk their most advanced warships on a strategy that depends on enemy psychology rather than superior firepower. Why should I trust your assessment of hegemony thinking? Because I've studied every major hegemony military action for the past 50 years, Marcus replied without hesitation. Their doctrine is based on overwhelming superiority and minimal risk to their own forces. When faced with unexpected resistance that might cost them significant losses, they consistently choose to withdraw and seek easier targets. And if you're wrong, then we die fighting for our freedom instead of living as slaves. The simple honesty of the answer seemed to decide the Emperor. Very well, General Korthvex, prepare our stealth squadrons for deep penetration assault. Admiral Chen, your ships will need to sell the deception convincingly. As the command staff dispersed to implement the desperate plan, Zaraketh found herself alone with Marcus for what might be the last time. The weight of everything that had changed between them pressed down on her consciousness. Marcus, she said quietly, I need you to know something. He turned to face her, and she saw in his eyes the same awareness that this might be their final conversation. 3 weeks ago, I swore I would never marry a human, she continued. I believed your people were barbaric, primitive, unworthy of alliance with the Vorthak Empire. And now? Now I understand that I was wrong about everything. Your courage, your honor, your willingness to sacrifice yourself for people you barely know. These are the qualities that define true civilization. If we survive this battle, I want to proceed with our marriage. Not because politics demands it, but because I choose it. Marcus stepped closer to her, and for the first time since they had met, he reached out to take one of her hands in his. The gesture was so human, so alien to Vorthak customs, that it should have felt strange. Instead, it felt completely natural. "Zaraketh," he said, "I came here expecting to fulfill a diplomatic obligation. Instead, I found someone who challenges me to be better than I thought I could be. If we survive this battle, I want to spend the rest of my life learning to be worthy of you." The sincerity in his voice broke through the last of her emotional defenses. In that moment, Zaraketh realized that she wasn't just choosing political alliance, she was choosing love. Their moment was interrupted by the ship-wide alert indicating that battle was about to commence. They made their way to the command center, where Emperor Thexmore was making final preparations for what would either be a desperate victory or a noble defeat. "All ships report ready," General Korthvex announced. "Human task force in position," Admiral Chen confirmed. Emperor Thexmore activated the fleet communication system. "Warriors of the Vorthak Empire and brave allies of the Human Federation, today we fight not just for our own freedom, but for the principle that independent peoples have the right to determine their own destiny. Whatever happens in the next few hours, know that you fight with honor for the noblest of causes." The battle that followed would be remembered as one of the most audacious military actions in galactic history. Admiral Chen's human ships charged directly into the hegemony perimeter, their seemingly suicidal assault drawing the attention of the entire enemy fleet. The human vessels fought with desperate courage, using their superior maneuverability to stay alive against impossible odds. While the hegemony forces focused on destroying the human task force, 4 Vorthak stealth cruisers slipped undetected through their formation. Moving like ghosts through space, they positioned themselves within striking distance of the enemy command ships. The moment of truth came when General Korthvex transmitted a message directly to the hegemony flagship. "Hegemony Command, you are now within range of our primary weapon systems. Your flagship and 2 escort dreadnoughts can be destroyed before your perimeter forces can respond. We offer you one opportunity to withdraw your forces and reconsider your position." The hegemony response was immediate and predictable, a demand for proof that the Vorthak ships could deliver on their threat. General Korthvex's answer was to target and destroy an unmanned hegemony supply vessel, demonstrating that his weapons were indeed capable of penetrating enemy shields. For 10 minutes that felt like hours, the opposing fleets faced each other in tense standoff. The human ships continued their desperate holding action, while the Vorthak stealth vessels maintained their threat against the hegemony command structure. Finally, the hegemony commander made his decision. Faced with the certain loss of multiple capital ships and the humiliation of being outmaneuvered by supposedly inferior opponents, he chose withdrawal over victory at unacceptable cost. "This is not over," came the transmission from the retreating hegemony fleet. "The collective will remember this defiance." "So will we," Emperor Thexmore replied calmly. As the enemy forces departed the system, Zaraketh felt a wave of emotions that left her temporarily speechless. They had survived. More than that, they had proven that the alliance between humans and Vorthaks could achieve things that neither species could accomplish alone. In the days that followed the battle, the political landscape of their sector shifted dramatically. News of the successful defense spread quickly, encouraging other independent species to resist hegemony dominance. The Human Federation gained enormous prestige from their willingness to fight alongside the Vorthaks, while the Vorthak Empire demonstrated that their military capabilities had been significantly underestimated. But for Zaraketh, the most important change was personal. The marriage that had begun as political necessity had transformed into a genuine partnership between 2 individuals who had discovered they complemented each other perfectly. The wedding ceremony took place 3 months later in the palace's Grand Hall, with representatives from dozens of species attending to witness the union that had defied the galaxy's most powerful alliance. Traditional Vorthak rituals were combined with human customs, creating a celebration that honored both cultures while pointing toward their shared future. As Princess Zaraketh stood beside Captain Marcus Reed, exchanging vows that bound not just their lives, but their people's destinies, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The human she had sworn never to marry had become the partner she couldn't imagine living without. "I, Zaraketh of the Vorthak Empire," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the assembled crowd, "choose you, Marcus Reed of humanity, as my companion, my equal, and my love. Together we will build bridges between our peoples and face whatever challenges the galaxy brings." Marcus's response was equally heartfelt. "I, Marcus Reed of the Human Federation, choose you, Zaraketh of the Vorthaks, as my partner in all things. Your wisdom guides me, your courage inspires me, and your love completes me." As they were declared married according to the laws of both their species, Zaraketh couldn't help but smile at the irony of her situation. She had begun this journey determined to prove that humans were unworthy of alliance with her people. Instead, she had discovered that one human in particular was worthy of sharing her life. The celebration that followed lasted for 3 days, with humans and Vorthaks mingling freely and learning about each other's cultures. It was a preview of the future their alliance would create, a galaxy where species differences were celebrated rather than feared, where cooperation replaced dominance as the foundation of interstellar relations. On their wedding night, as Zaraketh and Marcus stood together on the palace balcony looking out at the stars, she thought about the vow she had made such a short time ago. "I will never marry a human," she had declared with such certainty. "Any regrets?" Marcus asked, as if reading her thoughts. "Only one," she replied, leaning against his shoulder in a gesture that would have seemed impossible when they first met. "What's that?" "I regret that it took me so long to realize how wrong I was about your species." She looked up at him, her scales showing the warm gold that indicated deep contentment. "You didn't just change my mind about humans, Marcus. You changed everything I thought I knew about what was possible." "We changed each other," he corrected gently. "That's what real partners do." As they stood together under the light of distant stars, Zaraketh knew that their marriage was more than just the union of two individuals. It was the beginning of a new era in galactic relations, one based on understanding rather than fear, cooperation rather than dominance. The human she had sworn never to marry had indeed changed everything. And for the first time in her life, Princess Zaraketh of the Vorthak Empire was completely happy with the direction that change had taken her people and her heart.